Sony's journey started in 1946 in the wake of World War II, when Masaru Ibuka started an electronics shop at Shirokiya, Japan Village Walk in the Nihonbashi area of Tokyo. Initially, it started with a capital of 190,000 yen and just 8 employees. A few months later, a friend and businessman, Ako Morita, whom he had met during World War II while designing heat-seeking missiles for the Imperial Japanese Army, joined Masaru Ibuka to start a small company called Tokyo Chushin Kogyo. In English, this means Tokyo Telecommunications Engineering Corporation. Apparently, the main objective of this company was to design and develop innovative products to benefit people. After the establishment of the company, it launched its first consumer product, the electric rice cooker. Unfortunately, sales were poor, one of the factors being the brand name at the time, Totsuko. Regardless, it successfully provided radio repair services and even worked for the Japanese radio broadcaster NHK. Later in 1950, it built its very first device and Japan's first tape recorder, the Type G. This also sold poorly, causing the need for a change of name, as they believed the marketing name was a significant reason for its low sales. Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo was not bad, however, it was not exactly a good fit for marketing. At first, they were considering using TTK, which wouldn't have been a bad idea, but sadly, a railway company, Tokyo Kyuko, was already famous as TTK. Due to the difficulty they experienced from international partners who couldn't pronounce the occasional acronym Totsuko, the need for a more romanized name intensified. Eventually, Sony was decided on, and this name was derived from Sonny, which means little son, and from the Latin word sonus, which means the root of sonic and sound. However, in Japan as of 1958, there was a common slang term, Sonny boys, which meant intelligent, energetic, and passionate young men. But Masaru Ibuka and Akio Morita thought of themselves as Sonny boys, making the name perfect for the corporation, hence why it was renamed Sony Corporation. Sony's journey to globalization was not an easy one. However, they were determined and thrived amidst the challenges, and now they are universally recognized as the best in many industries, including music. But it all started with its daring move towards globalization in 1952. After changing their name to Sony, Masaru Ibuka traveled to the US to request licensing from the Western Electric Company, which was unsuccessful, but they still didn't give up. The following year, his partner Akio Morita traveled to the US, where he was awarded the licensing contract. This signed deal was the beginning of everything successful for Sony, as it led to the invention of the Sony transistor radio in 1957. The Sony TR-63, as it was named, was a pocket-sized and affordable transistor radio that caught lots of attention and made lots of sales. And due to the success of these sales, Sony became a widely internationally recognized brand. In early 1960, as sales kept booming in the US, Sony's co-founder Akio Morita founded the Sony Corporation of America in New York. And during this period, he learned of the mobility of employees in American companies, and with this, he went to Japan and encouraged people to join Sony. Sony introduced the MD5 transistor desktop calculator back in America at the 1964 New York World's Fair. And then in 1968, it shipped its first Trinitron color television. At this point, Sony was already well known and had begun to change the world's perception of made-in-Japan products. In 1971, Akio Morita became the president of the company after Masaru Ibuka, the initial founder and former president, handed his position to him. Furthermore, in 1979, Sony established its life insurance company, which is one of the many business subsidiaries Sony owns. And as time went on, Sony developed its first color video cassette recorder, which led to the Betamax video cassette recorder in 1975, universally referred to as the best VCR technology ever developed. Sony would go on to invent its portable Walkman in 1979, and the Walkman was a global sensation that sold hundreds of millions. And in 1982, Sony changed management, appointing Norio Olga as president of the corporation. The appointed president was a Japanese man who had complained about the first tape recorder's faults, which got him noticed by the original founders of Sony. Initially, he was hired as a part consultant at Sony because of his insights into music and technology. He later became the executive director of Sony in 1964 and president of the CBS/Sony Records in 1970, and was eventually appointed as president of Sony Corporation in 1982. After his appointment, Sony partnered with Philips Electronics to develop the first compact disc player. Unfortunately, the Betamax VCR lost its market shares when its competitor, the Video Home System, pushed it out of the market because of its expensive pricing. With this, Sony developed its own VHS in 1988. And having developed their VHS, Sony introduced the now famous PlayStation in the early 1990s. But despite the many successes of Sony, the company, however, faced some difficulties in the mid to late 2000s. In the early 2000s, Sony started to lose its competitive edge as competitors such as Samsung had invaded the market and undercut its high-priced TVs and stereos. So it made a huge loss in sales, and with this, Sony started cutting back on its workforce, factories, and facilities by nearly 20%. And while trying to expand into the cell phone market, it also experienced immense hardship, which frustrated Sony. And not to mention that sales from other electronic products were already low as it was, and so this frustrated them even more. Also, in 2003, it announced that it had made a loss of $927 million just in the first 3 months of that year. With this, the stock plunged and the company lost $3.8 billion. The loss was mainly attributed to restructuring costs, lack of a hit movie in its entertainment subsidiary, slow sales, and competition from other companies. And apart from all the difficulties already mentioned, the Great Economic Recession of 2008 definitely didn't help things. However, there is a good side to this. In the late 2000s, Sony's sales skyrocketed, making millions of dollars and expanding its corporations to include various subsidiaries. So now let's talk about how Sony revolutionized the music industry. As we all know, the first top record companies, or the Big Three industry as it's fondly called, are Universal Music Group, Warner Music Group, and Sony Music Entertainment, with Sony being the largest global record company among the three. You simply can't mention music record companies without mentioning Sony. However, we know that Sony didn't start as a music record company, but rather as an electronics shop. So how was Sony able to top the industry by being one of the best record companies in the world? Well, fortunately, I'm here to tell you. So it all started in 1968, when Sony partnered with CBS Records in Japan to form a joint venture with a 50-50 stake. CBS Records then changed its name to CBS/Sony Group. In March 1988, Sony then acquired the remaining 50% stake in CBS Records for $2 billion, and it was then renamed Sony Music Entertainment. Sony Music Entertainment is controlled by the Sony Corporation of America, the US subsidiary of Sony. Over the years, Sony acquired other companies such as Famous Music, Bertelsmann AG, and Grace Note. The acquisition of Famous Music gave it rights to the catalogs of Eminem, Akon, and some other, wait for it, famous, successful musicians. However, it sold one of its acquired companies, Grace Note, to Tribune Media for $170 million. And aside from its record label, Sony also operates the most extensive ATV music publishing company in the world. In 1995, it merged its music publishing firm with Michael Jackson's ATV Music Publishing, forming Sony ATV Music Publishing. This merger gave its publishing rights to over 4 million compositions by famous musicians, including those of Lady Gaga, Eminem, Bob Dylan, and the Beatles' Lennon-McCartney. Moving forward, the company also bought a majority stake in EMI Music Publishing. As a result, it has grown to become the world's largest music publishing company. Taking complete control of the company, Sony bought out Michael Jackson's ATV, making Sony the sole owner of the Sony ATV. And as of December 16th of 2022, Sony Corporation is estimated to be worth $96.94 billion, making it one of the most expensive companies in the world. So it's hard to say if Sony ever thought that it would be this great. Maybe it did, but still, I doubt it knew that it would one day revolutionize the music industry and now predominate the gaming industry and many other industries. And it's applaudable how this small company, which started as an electronics shop, is now globally recognized as the #1 in most industries despite its challenges.